Elon Musk has called the government decision to fight that court case in relation to the Epping Asylum Hotel. He says the government is committing treason against its own people. I wonder if you'd agree with that assessment.
I wouldn't use that language, no, but the government have got themselves into a terrible pickle on this, because on the one hand they say they want to close the hotels, they've promised that, and on the other hand they're using lawyers and taxpayers' money to say that actually the hotels have got to stay open and the rights of illegal migrants is greater than the rights of British citizens. That's literally what part of their application was. So look, they're in a terrible mess on this. What they should do is adopt our policy, which is to set up detention centres in remote areas away from residential areas and rapidly process people. And on every metric, the government's failing. The number of people crossing this year, the channel is up about 50%. The backlog is up. The number of people using that to hotels, I believe, is up. So all of these metrics where the government said they were going to do something, actually the opposite is happening.
And you've spelled out your plan this week. There's a couple of sort of issues that have got a bit of attention and not entirely clear. Let's just see if we can clear them up. The first is the deportation deals that you want to strike with countries where people are coming from. Would that include countries like the Afghanistan and the Taliban leadership there?
Yeah, we'll be negotiating deals with a range of countries. You need a range of options so you're not overexposed to one country like the Tories were with Rwanda. Do you know what? Sometimes you have to do business with people that you may not like. You may not want to go to the pub with.
Even the Taliban?
Well, for example, if we want a ceasefire in Gaza, which everybody does, you have to deal with the terrorists Hamas. If we want a ceasefire in Ukraine, which everybody does, then you have to deal with Putin and his team.
Peace. And so we're talking about deportations. It's slightly different matter.
You know, it's the principle of dealing with people that you may not like. That happens in business. It happens in running countries. Governing is a difficult process, but ultimately, yes. We send 150 million quid a year to Afghanistan, which effectively means we're sending it to the Taliban.
If you were in business, you wouldn't be striking deals with the Taliban.
No,
you wouldn't be dealing. If you did a deal with Hamas in business, you'd be done under the Terror Act.
But if we're lucky enough to be running the country, then yes, we will be looking to do deals with a range of countries. Now, there's no guarantee that you can do a deal with any of these people, and that's why you need to look at a range of countries so that you will do deals with some. And what that does is start to create a proper deterrent so that people stop coming across the channel, because they know they will be immediately detained and they will be rapidly processed, rapidly rejected and rapidly removed from the United Kingdom.
Any qualms at all, morally, ethically, about doing business with the Taliban?
Do you know what the job of the British government is? It's to advance the prospects and prosperity of British citizens. And we should not be held responsible for every weird, wacky, despotic regime around the country. Terrible things happen. It's very sad. We'd all love the world to be a perfect place. It's not. That's the harsh reality.
I'm just saying, would you have any qualms about going and meeting the Taliban, signing a deal, shaking hands, backslaps all round, we've done the deal? Would that not bother you in any way?
If it means that we are advancing the removal of people who've come here illegally, and advancing the protection of British women and girls, then if that's got to be done, it'll be done.
Because you would say, actually, that when it comes to deporting people en masse, like you're talking about, that trumps any sort of ethical objections at all to working with these sorts of regimes?
Yes, it does. Because the role of the British government is to look after the British people. No ifs, no buts.
In terms of actually what happens when people are here, you're talking about a new British Bill of Rights. So you'd pause the Refugee Convention, you'd pause or pull out of the ECHR.
We'd pause the Refugee Convention, we'd pull out of the ECHR lock, stock and barrel, and we'll scrap the Human Rights Act. And then there'll be a gap before a British Bill of Rights.
And this British Bill of Rights would only apply to British citizens?
Yes.
So if you've lived here for 30 years but you're not actually a citizen, you have worse rights or fewer rights than somebody.
Isn't it interesting that before the Human Rights Act of 1998, actually the country was doing quite well. Public services were a lot better than they are now. The economy was growing at 2.5% to 3.5% a year. And there is a strong argument that actually things like the Human Rights Act, things like the Equalities Act of 2010, have actually been partially responsible, not totally, but partially responsible for more lawfare, declining productivity, productivity and declining growth.
But just to be clear on the policy, people who have lived here, however long they've lived here, if they're not British citizens, would have fewer rights than people who were British citizens under your plans.
And frankly, that's not an unreasonable proposition. Of course, we'll debate it. We'll look at the specific detail.
Tice, you probably more than any politician have warned about two-tier justice in this country in recent months. That is the epitome of two-tier justice. Whether you have rights and which rights you have would depend on whether you were a citizen or not. That's two-tier justice in action.
A British citizen is a British citizen. Someone who is a foreign national, by definition, that is a two-tier structure. They're not a British citizen.
Even if they've lived here for 40 years.
And look, we will look at all the specific detail of how long someone has lived here. But I don't think it's unreasonable to reiterate, and this is why I think one of the reasons we're leading in the polls, we tell it as it is. Our job is to focus on advancing the interests of the British people, British citizens, and to make people better off and improve the quality of housing and public services. And that's what we're focused on.
The Archbishop of York coming out this weekend and describing your plan as isolationist, short-term and knee-jerk. I know you're a proud Christian man, Mr. Tice. Does that bother you, church leaders criticising you in that way?
No, it doesn't, to be honest. I think that the Church of England should focus on their own internal problems. Let's start. Perhaps they should start by finding a new Archbishop of Canterbury who should do a decent job, increase the congregations like other churches are doing, and focus on all the things around Christianity and leave international immigration policies to elected politicians.
They are supposed to be the sort of moral authorities, or some of them in this country. They speak out when they think that, that unviable norms and sort of ethical rules are being broken. And it sounds to me like that's what he thinks your policy does.
Well, he's veering into areas that historically and traditionally, and I think should be dealt with by elected politicians, which is international immigration policies. So, yeah, he can talk about being kind and thinking carefully and justice and all those good things that I view from the Church of England, and that's sort of Christianity that I've grown up with. But I don't recall hearing any sermons about international immigration policies in the 60 years I've been going to church.
Just one other element of your policy that sort of caused some concern and confusion, I think. Would women and girls be included amongst the people that you would deport?
The overall principle is that no one who is here illegally can expect to remain here forever. That is an overarching guiding principle, because otherwise you continue the magnet factor. But look, we don't actually know how many people are here illegally. It might be 1 million. So look,
that includes women and girls.
Of course, it includes women and girls, and boys as well. The first phase is about removing men, and then we will see, once we try and understand what actually are the real numbers we're dealing with, what are the specific cases, of course, you can look at, but there has to be an overarching principle, which is that if you are here illegally, you cannot expect to stay here forever. If you think you can come here illegally, you cannot expect to remain here for very long. And that
includes women and girls.
And that ultimately will include women and girls.
Including sending them to places like Afghanistan?
Well,
Sudan?
those are all the details that we've got to look at when we know what sort of details we've got. Look, at the end of the day, nothing's off the table.
Okay. But it's
really important. That's the advantage, to reiterate, of having a range of deals with a range of countries, including potentially, as Nigel said last Tuesday, British overseas territories.
Who would be able to come here and claim asylum under a reform government?
Well, actually, we were doing asylum quite well 20 years ago, when on average we were welcoming about, give or take, 20,000 people. And to its credit, the then Labour government was deporting over 40,000 people every year. I think they were accepting about 18 to 25% of applications. Now that figure is in the 70s.
But of course, the Conservatives closed all the routes you're referring to.
The Conservatives made a complete mess of everything.
Would you reopen?
You just got to start everything again.
So you would reopen some of the legal routes.
We need to have a working asylum policy. But the first, to be honest, initially, I think one's got to just press the complete pause button whilst we work out what actually on earth has really gone on. How many people really are here? And where are they? What are they up to?
Your party chairman talking about your deportation plan being akin to Trump 2.0, as Housier Youssef put it. Is the sort of Trump administration a bit of an inspiration for reform when it comes to this?
Well, they do seem to have succeeded with regard to closing their border with Mexico. they're talking about having reduced illegal immigration across that border to the square root of not a lot. So, yes, I mean, that actually, I think we should learn lessons from that. And we should be prepared to learn lessons from countries all over the world that succeed in different areas. And what I fear is that for too long, our establishment class and civil service think that we know best about everything. We don't. The country is in a terrible state. It's also, by the way, going bankrupt. You only got to look at the cost of 30-year borrowing at the moment, which is at a give or take 30-year high, to realise the financial markets, the bond markets, are very anxious about the lack of growth, the extraordinary amount of government borrowing, and the inability of this government to control public spending.
Let me just bring you back to migration just finally. Ziyosif also defended the use of the word invasion to describe what's happening on the southern coast, Mr. Tice. Is that language you would echo?
Yes, it is an invasion. About 180,000 people.
But an invasion suggests they're coming here to take
control. It's
control.
double the size of the British Army. But if we had said 5 years ago, oh, by the way, folks, 180,000 people are just going to rock up on the shores of the south of England without any form of documentation, illegally, I think most people say, hang on, that sounds a bit like an invasion.
But an invasion suggests they're here to take control, doesn't it?
You can read into it. Well, they are here to take advantage.
They're here to claim asylum.
No, they're here to take advantage of our hospitality, our generosity, and I'm afraid the British people have had enough of that, because we are heading towards bankruptcy. We cannot afford this. It was working well in sensible numbers, a sensible asylum policy. So, right, give or take, 20,000 a year, 20 years ago, was working well.
They are
we
invaders.
All welcome that.
These men and women and children are invaders, in your view?
This is effectively, that's what it is. It is, they're all coming here illegally, and some of them, I regret to say, are coming either as part of criminal gangs, or they are essentially slaves of criminal gangs because they've borrowed the money to pay for their crossing, and then they have to work for these gangs in hideous conditions.
This country's a tinderbox at the moment. I'm sure you'd agree with that. Part of it, I completely accept, is the failure to stop the problem we're talking about here. I put it to you as well that language like invasion, it makes things so much worse. It makes this country so much more divided.
Do you know what makes things better? Telling the truth.
But
even if it's uncomfortable, why we're leading the polls is because we tell it as it is and we come up with solutions that will work to make this country better. And actually, the country voters are furious with both the Tories and Labour,
I'm not disagreeing.
who promised one thing and have done exactly the opposite.
I'm not disputing that for a minute. I'm also saying language matters. And at a time of heightened tensions, we had Bridget Phillipson on earlier, she was saying you, all people in positions of power, have a responsibility to use moderate language to try and dial down the rhetoric rather than ramping it up. Phrases like invasion are the opposite of that. They intentionally ramp up tensions.
It might upset some people in the establishment class in and around Westminster. Let me tell you, in Boston and Skegness and my constituency, it doesn't upset almost anybody. I'll tell you what it is. It's the truth, and that's how they talk about it, and they appreciate me standing up for their interests. And I think that's what's going on up and down the country.
People. It's about whether you are contributing to a greater sense of national unity that makes this country a better place to live, or deepening the divisions that make this country so divided at the moment.
Clearly we are, because look at the polls. We're leading in the last poll by about 15 points. So I think actually we are beginning to bring people together under the reform plans and proposals. And even if there might be quite a few people, for example, who say, well, that wasn't quite where I was a few years ago, but the country's in such a state, we've got to change things because it's gone way too far. And sometimes that's what happens. And that's the joy of democracy. People can say, well, I'm going to lend you my vote for a few years to see if you genuinely can do what you say you can do. The others have tried, they've failed, they messed it up. And this idea of banning words and language...
It's not banning it. It's about the consequences. No one's saying it should be bad. It's about... all I'm putting to you is the consequences of that language are more harmful than they are beneficial.
I think the British people appreciate some honesty about the emergency situation that this country is in and saying we need to stop it and change it. And if this government adopts our policies...
allegations of masks, men trying to break into hotels. Does this sort of... And I'm sure you condemn that. But does this sort of... I'm sure you would. But does this sort of language not... is it not a slippery slope to those sorts of things, because you are whipping up anger you are whipping up hatred?
By being a sensible, responsible party that is looking to run this country, we are preventing anything much worse coming. And that's what happens if you try and bury something and not allowed to talk about it, which in a sense for the last decade people haven't been, then bad things can happen underground. Much better to talk about it openly, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable.
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK. Your calls coming in on that. Come to those just after the news headlines here on LBC.